Illinois scientists, researchers, and activists took the world stage this month at the COP26 Climate Conference. Last Friday, the two-week-long meeting wrapped up. World leaders agreed to some goals like keeping the global temperature from varying more than 1.5 degrees Celsius to calling upon countries to move toward lower emission sources of energy. So what impact did local environmental advocates at the conference have on leaders and policymakers from around the world? Joining us are three people who attended COP26. Lily Aaron, a senior at Evanston Township High School and a member of It's Our Future, which is part of the Oak Park-based environmental nonprofit 7 Generations Ahead. Aaron Dernbaugh, Director of Sustainability at Loyola University Chicago. And Vernita Pearl-Ford, a member of the Board of Directors of the Center for United Nations Constitutional Research and ecologist, economist, and research scholar at the University of Illinois Global Institute in Urbana-Champaign. And she's still in Glasgow, Scotland this evening joining us. We thank you all for being here. Aaron Dernbaugh, I'll start with you. What are the tangible takeaways from COP26?
Thanks, Paris. Thanks for having us on this evening. I think we can look at it in a number of different ways, and I think it's probably not fair to get too judgmental on where was it a success or was it a failure. There are certainly those on both sides. You know, holding that meeting up as an expectation of what should be taking place globally is probably not fair. The actual goal is that you're bringing together 197 countries to try to agree on something over the course of 2 weeks, and they're negotiating, crafting agreements, and making commitments to track and report emissions. And that process did move forward, so that was successful.
So all those delegates, we see President Biden there right now. Lily, in your view, how did world leaders handle creating goals to combat climate change?
I believe that there are a number of things that went well. I think that in terms of mobilizing on 1.5, that is definitely a priority, and I know that it was brought up for a lot of time during the conference itself. I think that in terms of highlighting Indigenous leadership, especially youth perspective, activists from the Global South, BIPOC, marginalized communities across the board, I think that since these people are at the forefront of this crisis, highlighting their perspectives and making sure that they have a spot at the table is something that is absolutely crucial to forming policy that is intersectional and all-encompassing.
Vernita Pearl-Ford, what about that? Do you believe that the outcomes here are sufficient to tackle the crisis at hand? You might be on mute. There we are.
Thank you. It's not sufficient. It's a process. The good thing that happened is that voices from around the world gathered in Glasgow. Many different groups from academia to people who are activists, people who are scholars coming together to say, this is the kind of world that we want. Part of the complaint, however, was that they could not participate in the actual negotiations. It's a statement about the democratic process or the absence of a democratic process in coming to decision making. And it's in that space where the organization on which I serve as a board member, the Center for United Nations Constitutional Research, believes it is very important for us to revisit the United Nations Charter. That charter was created in 1945, 76 years ago, with 50 nations. And the majority of the Black world, for example, was not permitted as a result of colonization and as a result of Jim Crow. W.B. Du Bois wanted to come. They finally let it come, and NAACP in 1945, but as an observer. Now we have 193 nations, part of the UN, and that United Nations came into being in 1945 at the end of World War II. And that was a crisis. This crisis is even greater. There is a clause in the charter that actually says that we have the right, Article 109, to review and possibly alter this charter. It would give us the opportunity to actually put in binding legislation, perhaps to establish an environmental court to address many of the things that have not been addressed today.
All right, so you're calling for big changes to the United Nations Charter there to bring in more countries here on climate change. Aaron, I want to go back to you. One of the things that was agreed on was the acknowledgement that fossil fuels are a huge contributor and a commitment to reduce reliance on fossil fuels. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, there were a number of agreements, a number of announcements, and some of those were made up between just smaller groups of organizations or smaller groups of countries. But there were two that really stuck out to me. One of them, one of the most important ones, is that the countries need to come back to COP next year, which will be taking place this time next year in Egypt, to share more ambitious emissions reduction goals, not in 2025 when that was originally scheduled. And so I think urgency and ambition is being heard and trying to be accommodated within a pretty sticky process. Also, the final document, the Glasgow Climate Pact, had specific language, I think this is what you're referring to, which included calling for a, quote, phase out of unabated coal power and inefficient fossil fuel subsidies, unquote. And that's the first time in 25 years of these meetings, more than 25 years, that we call out the primary source of global warming in the fossil fuel sector. And so I think that's significant.
So it's just progress there, perhaps more progress needed. Lily, Aaron, as we mentioned, all three of you were at this conference. Tell us about your experience there.
I had a wonderful experience. I primarily do a lot of grassroots organizing. So in terms of federal organizing and delving into global policy, it's something that has been really new to me and has been, as a senior in high school, a really eye-opening experience. I do have to admit, though, in terms of representation at actual negotiating tables, I feel that youth, BIPOC, the disabled community, Indigenous leadership, and again, marginalized communities across the board have been sorely misrepresented, where global leaders are actually delving into the nitty-gritty of legitimate policy. But then again, I feel that in terms of bringing folks together from all over the world to mobilize in the name of climate justice, it served as an amazing opportunity.
Vernita Pearl-Fort, one of the disagreements here is on how much that developed nations should compensate developing nations, especially coastal nations that face rising sea levels as a result of climate change. How much compensation there should be? What needs to be done on that front?
Yes, the term of loss and damage is used to discuss that. Right now, people talk about climate change in the future. People are suffering and dying today as a result of climate change. And the first hit and the hardest hit often are in the global south. So also, these countries are being asked to pay for what they did not create in many respects. And so what is the funding pool that will be available so that people can, at minimum, survive and then hopefully to thrive and prosper? But emissions have to come down in the north. Prosperity has to increase in the south. And so that is going to be the big debate. I do believe coming to the United Nations Charter will also give another platform for discourse to discuss how do we do this. We are at a great turning right now.
All right, well, still much more to come on this, much more to talk about. And our thanks to Aaron Dernbaugh, Lily Aaron, and Vernita Pearl-Fort.
Thank you.